listen. Maybe floppy later. ALV at night.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. This part in the Brinks-mat series is that we've had the two main robbers. They've gone to prison for 25 years each. Mick McAvoy and Brian Robinson. Also, as well, the two main guys that were handling the gold and the smelting and laundering of the money had been sent to jail for for the handling of the gold bullion, which is Kenneth Noy and Brian Reader. But before I go further into the story, I just want to welcome you all and thank you all for coming. So first off, Gerard, always a pleasure. Good to see you. BK Skip, thank you for coming. Good to see you. Marta Fowler, thank you. As always, thank you for coming. Deborah Roberts, it's always a pleasure. Thank you. Also, as well, we have, just going to go down here a bit further. Yeah, the main man, excellent show. We've just been at Tindu and Vito. Brilliant show. Thank you. Mrs. Skip Spirit in the Sky Blue. Thank you as always. Good to see you. And there he is, Paul, the main man. Again, thank you. Always here. I appreciate that. And I believe we've got Mrs. Gina D. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Right. Let's see if I've got anyone to get all the way down. ALV. Well, thank you as always. Have a good night a little bit later on. Edwin, as always one of the main men as well, always helping all the time. Thank you. Right. So as I've mentioned there, now we're coming into the late 80s, hence for the rave music, which I've just been playing. I know it's not everyone's acquired taste, but I did it so it sort of fits in line with the story. So obviously, the gold is leaking out. It's being smelted down. It's being resold back on the market, and it's being invested into a lot of businesses and projects. But one of the main things is doing. Oh, hello, Mr. Balding. Good to see you, sir. One of the main things it has been funding is the drugs trade. Now, ecstasy was just starting to take off in Britain in the late 1980s. Unlike heroin and cocaine, it could be sold to teenagers as user-friendly. It was initially claimed to be far less lethal than its Class A equivalents. And amphetamine, it propelled the release of a chemical, serotonin, which gives an immediate rush to the brain. However, it wasn't long before known side effects, including panic attacks, kidney, liver, and heart problems, became evident. Nevertheless, Noy and the other members of the Brinks-mat team could smell a real earner in E. It had the potential to give them the return of 10 times on the gold bullion money they had invested in. Okay, I'm just going to go on to Avatar. Inside Swaleside Prison in Kent, Pat Tate and Kenneth Noy soon spread the word from the late 1980s to the early 90s. Brinks-mat cash would deluge Britain with ecstasy. Ecstasy provided the gang and their fences with a perfect investment opportunity. Explained one of the detectives involved in the Brinks-mat inquiry, there is absolutely no doubt that the flood of ecstasy into Britain started largely because of the Brinks-mat cash that was floating around at the time. Certain members of the Brinks-mat team had already invested money in cocaine, but they'd soon follow Noy's example and move on to E because it was more profitable and far less risky. Drugs had fast become the backbone of all the business opportunities inside and outside the prison. All it needed was a few phone calls and the money would come pouring in. Oh, I'll just stop there. Hello, Bambi. Good to see you. Joe Delamora. Pleasure as always. Okay. Yeah, so Brinks-mat investigators have even encouraged the prison authorities to allow Noy and other Brinks-mat inmates a free rein because that they were convinced that they might lead them to others involved in the Brinks-mat job, as well as to the remaining gold. The Brinks-mat inmates knew that being in prison had its advantages because it meant that they were all one step ahead and was removed from the purchases of the drugs. In other words, it was actually more convenient for them to control the drug deals from inside prison because they had the ultimate alibi if anyone tried to finger them. But the Brinks-mat gang members knew that being behind bars wouldn't stop the insurers chasing after the legitimately belonged to them. Many of the Brinks-mat criminals' bank accounts had been frozen, but most of the gold was still missing. Significantly, the villains now acknowledged that the Brinks-mat insurance investigators were working under their own steam, not in the pockets of the police. So some of the robbers had decided to negotiate with them in order to get them off their backs. Brinks-mat wanted its money back, nothing more, nothing less. So the robbers didn't foresee this, that actually the insurance of the gold, that they were going to go hard. As I say, they couldn't, unlike the police where they could give them bribes and backhanders, the insurance company weren't letting go of this. So the insurance agents had already spent months following the wives, families, and the associates of the gang. They checked out everything from the money spent on the weekly shopping for the family to the types of cars they brought to the cost of the luxury holidays the wives regularly took while their husbands were in prison. In the middle of 1988, lawyers representing the Brinks-mat gang met insurance investigators once again and tried to work out a deal that would suit both sides. But it would take some time because none of the villains wanted to be completely cleaned out of cash. They also expected to stay in control of the situation, even from inside prison. McAvoy was particularly obsessed with holding the reins. As one of the oldest friends explains, Mickey trusted no one, and the only way he could deal with people was to be in complete control of the situation, or at least as far as he was concerned. Now, the Brinks-mat insurance's representatives were relieved to find that dealing with the men's lawyers and accountants was much easier and safer than talking to some of the alleged robbers still at liberty. Hello, Dave T. Good to see you. Now, many of those who hadn't been convicted were negotiating on behalf of the incarcerated members of the Brinks-mat team. As one of the investigators pointed out, with some of these characters, you had to watch your back constantly to see who was sitting nearby. Guns were often shown tactfully just to remind us who we are dealing with. But McAvoy, Robertson, Noy would never show such disrespect to insurance agents. As far as they were concerned, dealing with the Brinks-mat investigators was just another aspect of their job. They'd got involved in a risky venture, so they needed to find a way out of the latest spot of bother. Naturally, those Brinks-mat gang members who were in prison also continued to receive numerous visits from police detectives, still trying to persuade them to reveal who else was involved in the robbery. The subsequent laundering operation and the location of the remainder of the gold, all of the men showed complete and utter contempt towards the police. They said they weren't interested in deals anymore. On one occasion, Kenneth Noy lost his temper with two detectives, thumped his hand on the table in front of him, and warned them to fuck off out of my life. As one of the detectives later recalled, that was when we saw Noy's true colours. He didn't like us putting him under pressure. He was not a pleasant man. He had a temper that was terrifying. On the 14th of November 1992, all the incarcerated Brinks-mat gang members watched themselves portrayed on television from their prison cells. The story of the raid had been made into a primetime TV film called Fool's Gold, starring Sean Bean as Mick McAvoy. Unsurprisingly, the Brinks-mat gang members were irritated that their new round of Brinks-mat publicity, fueled by the film, inevitably sparked police further activity at a time when the insurance investigators were still pushing hard to recover all the stolen gold. While in prison, at least two of the gang members were told that they had been barred from membership of the Freemasons. It annoyed them enormously as they had been busily planning all sorts of new ventures linked to their Masonic contacts for when they were released. They still needed that impressive Masons network to ensure that their criminal careers could continue unhindered. But one setback wasn't going to stop them from keeping a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. Having reaped enormous profits from the ecstasy and cocaine deals, certain members of the Brinks-mat gang decided to go it alone and cut out the tedious middlemen who seemed to accompany every big drug deal and always took a chunk of the profit. The Brinks-mat gang members knew that the risks would be higher than before, but they believed that By building an independent empire to handle all their deals, their profits would soar. Their contacts their contacts inside the Kent Constabulary and Mint Police remained invaluable. While still in prison, Kenneth Noy began to get reports from the National Crime Intelligence Service. Through one of his police contacts, he discovered that his own movements and phone calls were being monitored, and the officers from the Southeast Regional Crime Squad had joined forces with the American Drug Enforcement Admin, the DEA, to target Noy and other members of the Brinks-mat gang who'd recently started setting up drug deals through Noy's old contacts in the Miami Mafia. Noy was told by his inside source that the US drug enforcement agents had monitored prison phone calls he'd made to an intermediary to Florida and had almost enough evidence to implicate him in a huge deal. Noy immediately pulled out of the deal, and the NCIS realized they had been compromised. A 6-month ongoing investigation into Kenneth Noy had to be abandoned at the cost of tens of thousands of pounds. Elsewhere, the curse of the Brinks-mat continued on its murderous path. One of the gang's London-based money launderers, Donald Urquhart, was shot dead by a hired assassin in a London street in January 1993. It later transpired that the gun used in the killing was supplied by another Brinks-mat associate, policeman turned underworld gun dealer Sidney Wink. Police later revealed that a hitman had stalked Urquhart for 55 for up to 3 months before shooting him in front of his girlfriend as they left their local pub in Marylebone High Street in central London. When detectives examined Donald's car, they found it was equipped with 3 telephones and a fax machine. He had used it as an office for many of his business deals. Donald was a former hod carrier who claimed he built up his fortune during the property boom of the 1970s and 80s, but detectives soon uncovered his various interests in the Cayman Islands and Jersey tax havens. No one seemed safe, apart, or ironically, from those Brinks-mat gang members still serving lengthy sentences for their role in the crime of the century. Now, it wasn't just drugs that the Brinks-mat gang were expanding their operations into. Kenneth Noy was released from prison in the summer of 1994 and soon afterwards spent a month on the northern half of the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. Noy intended to invest hundreds of thousands of pounds into a timeshare development that he believed would earn him a fortune, just like his old pal John Palmer. Palmer's Canary Island timeshare empire had made him a legend in the underworld and earned him tens of millions of pounds. So you can see now that the gang are looking at timeshares, investing into property and holiday homes. So his fortunes had taken a slight knock when in December 1991, having earlier been acquitted of the handling of the Brinks-mat gold, Palmer was given an 8-month suspended sentence for his part in a mortgage fraud. His old pal Garth Chappell, who had been found guilty of involvement in the Brinks-mat theft, was also convicted of the same charge. Palmer had already admitted obtaining nearly £65,000 by deception, was also ordered to pay £13,052 compensation and £5,000 in costs. But this didn't stop him retaining a vice-like grip on his vast domain and travelling everywhere with a shotgun, touting associate. By the mid-1990s, Palmer was looked up by many villains as the perfect example of a runaway success. Kenneth Noy was convinced he could make a similar fortune in northern Cyprus. 3 million tourists, mainly from the UK, visit the south of Cyprus every year, but only 30,000 came to the north, and an explosion of popularity was inevitable. However, even after his release, Noy was very much still a target for the police. All his movements and phone calls on the island were monitored by British Secret Service agents in collusion with the Metropolitan Police. If Noy knew he was being watched, he certainly didn't seem to care. In northern Cyprus, his entrepreneurial spirit knew few boundaries. Halfway through his stay on the island, Noye found a stretch of isolated coastline just north of the port of Famagusta. It was cheap and seemed the perfect location to build a timeshare empire. Noye's scheme would cater for tourists wanting to reserve for themselves for several weeks each year in an island villa. While in northern Cyprus, Noye agreed to invest more than £500,000 in the development and employed his old criminal associate, Brian Reeder's brother, Colin, to run it on his behalf. Noye called it the Long Beach Country Club. The attraction of the timeshare, as Noye had already learned from his old friend Palmer, was that by selling access to the properties in blocks at 1 week at a time, the amount made from all the weekly bookings added together would be much greater than the actual real estate value of the property. Noye helped finance the project by selling some of his gold stock and a number of other properties, including a trailer park business in Florida. He even got one crony to fly some cash out to him in northern Cyprus. Noye believed that within 5 years, the Long Beach Country Club would be booming. With his £500,000 investment in 32 timeshare villas, the sale of the weekly units would bring in more than £100,000 per villa, and his share of the profits would amount to a staggering £17 million. Back in London, another character connected to the Brinks-mat job was about to fall victim to the curse. Ex-Metropolitan Police Officer Sidney Wink was a gunsmith and a weapons dealer. His speciality, although it was never proved in the court of law, was renumbering illegal weapons, including those by the members of the Brinks-mat gang. Wink was strongly suspected of supplying the guns used in 2 earlier murders. In 1992, contract killing of the Brinks-mat money launderer Donald Ukwa and the shooting of PC Patrick Dunn by 3 Yardie gunmen. A week after this, in August 1994, officers investigating PC Dunn's murder raided Wink's Essex home and discovered his dead body. Wink apparently put a pistol to his own head and pulled the trigger. Now, many have speculated since that he was helped on his way, but there is no evidence to suggest that it was anything other than suicide. No doubt sparked by double dealing criminal activities that led to the killing of the fellow police officer. The network of connections between the Brinks-mat gang and the police grew ever more complex when certain members of the Brinks-mat gang got wind of the British intelligence services were keeping an eye on them. They began casting around and buy the services of a hard-up British intelligence officer. They believed it was only a matter of time before they found someone they could turn. Many ex-spies suffered from personal and money problems, making them especially vulnerable to tempting offers from cash-rich criminals. The gang actually believed that they could buy anyone off if the price was right, and they didn't like the way they were still being watched closely, one detective later explained. Eventually, Kenneth Noye made contact with a former intelligence officer whose security clearance had been withdrawn, but who still had access to certain computers. The agent agreed to keep Noye informed for a price because he was bitter about the way the intelligence services had treated him. But what Noye didn't realise was that the agent had been planted to spy on him, as one of the Brinks-mat police insiders explained. The idea was to monitor Noye's activities. We knew he was well aware of our surveillance, so this seemed the best way of keeping an eye on him without him knowing. Police had also been tapping phones belonging to Michael Lawson, Noye's criminal associate and good friend, who'd brought the smelter that was found in Noye's house by the Brinks-mat investigators following the death of PC John Fordham. Police taps were also put in the offices, as well as on all the mobile and hotel telephones used by both men. Surveillance officers were astounded when Noye entertained 3 prison officers and his best friend from he was inside Swaleside prison at his new house in Sevenoaks, Kent. The flagrant breach rules only came to light because customs and excise officers also had Noy under surveillance and traced the prison officer's car registration to Swaleside Prison. But an unexpected development came in 1994 when John Littlelegs Lloyd was named on America's Most Wanted TV crime show. A couple of weeks after it was first screened, he took the biggest gamble of his life by walking with his brief into Rochester Road Police Station to give himself up. Hello, Baywatcher. The Crown Prosecution Service eventually ruled that there was insufficient evidence linking him to the Brinks-mat job. The gamble had paid off. Less than a year later, Lloyd, according to police sources, allegedly donated a 5-figure sum to a consortium of insurance companies because he knew that even though there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute him in the court of law, he could be fingered for his role in the Brinks-mat raid. Yeah, no problem. I will do. Gerard. Yeah, okay. I'll slow down with the names. Okay. So it was John Littlelegs Lloyd, who was the one I was just talking about. Lloyd was advised by making this donation, he would at least avoid being hauled into a civil trial. Another man who, like Noy, had recently been released from Swaleside was his former henchman and fitness trainer, Pat Tate. Within weeks, Tate was running Essex main ecstasy supply route after getting financial backing from Noy and other Brinks-mat gang members for his drug business. The goal from the heist was almost single-handedly helping finance the huge influx of designer drug into the UK, reaping massive 10 and 20-fold profits for the gang in the process. In December 1994, a brick was thrown through the toilet window of Tate's house. When he peered outside, a gunman opened fire from close range with a revolver. Tate raised his right arm to shield his face, and the bullet hit him in the wrist, travelling up his arm and smashed bones in his elbow. Tate later admitted to his mother that his own murderous habits might have provoked the attack. He even hid a gun under the hospital bed where he'd been taken following the shooting. So just a few months earlier, Tate ambushed a 27-year-old drug dealer called Kevin Whitaker, who worked for a rival gang of drug pushers in Romford, Essex. Tate and an associate had paralysed Whitaker by forcing him to snort a substance called ketamine. Vets use it to numb the horses before castration, but it is also known in the world of narcotics as Special K. One of Tate's associates then snatched up a bag containing £60,000 worth of cannabis. As helpless Whitaker's muscles froze, the laughing gangsters pierced his groin with a syringe and pumped a deadly concoction into his blood. They injected him in the groin with ketamine or Special K, a paralysing drug that was often used on horses. Powerless but conscious and pleading for mercy, Whitaker was then injected with lignocaine. He died within minutes, and then they dumped his body in a nearby ditch in Basildon in Essex. Pat Tate was trying to scale the underworld ladder at least two rungs at a time, and he'd arrogantly overlooked the fact that revenge was now in the air. This was also combined with resentment amongst many other Essex criminals that he, Tate, was using the Brinks-mat proceeds to elevate his own standing, even though he played no part in the so-called crime of the century. Hello there, Grant. Good to see you. As all of this was going on, the bid to recover the Brinks-mat gold and its proceeds continued. The insurers even brought civil action against the Woolwich Building Society to gain access to all transactions made by suspected Brinks-mat robber John Littlelegs Lloyd's daughter, Jacqueline Seton, who lived in Chislehurst, Kent. She was also named in the writ against 6 people in a civil action alleging that they had wrongly interfered with the gold and demanding full restitution for its value. In January 1995, the High Court ordered Mickey McAvoy to make a payment of more than 27 million to the insurers, in effect making him responsible for the entire raid, although it was acknowledged that he was unlikely to pay the entire sum back to the authorities. In any case, he claimed unsurprisingly that he didn't even know where the gold was, although everyone in East London underworld knew only too well that he was expecting a windfall when he finally got released from prison. Now, in June 1995, with the pressure mounting, Kenneth Noy actually agreed to return nearly 3 million of the proceeds from the Brinks-mat robbery. In a confidential settlement, Noy gave laundered money back to the Brinks-mat underwriters. It later emerged that investigators had traced the money that was held in bank accounts in Britain and Ireland to him. Noy also gave up his claim to the 11 bars of Brinks-mat gold, worth £110,000, which were found under the patio of Hollywood Cottage. Noy conceded the deal after the underwriters agreed to make no claims against his recently acquired £300,000 mansion in Sevenoaks, which was now in his wife Brenda's name. So, as I say, these markups now that I'm saying, this is like the late 80s, early to mid 90s. So obviously, what they'll be worth today, is untold. According to evidence that would later be given in court at a pub just off the Old Kent Road, small and dirty enough to keep most ordinary punters out, and therefore chosen for its privacy by a number of southeast London faces, Kenneth Noy and Little Legs Lloyd began planning a vast cash card cloning scheme that they believed would net them an even bigger fortune than that yielded by the Brinks-mat robbery. Lloyd, common law husband of Brinks-mat handler Jean Lady Goldfinger Savage, was looking for backers to set up the audacious crime, so it was only natural he would turn to his old Brinks-mat gang members for an investment. The hole-in-the-wall job, also known as the ATM scam, had the potential to be the biggest crime ever committed, as it involved stealing £1 billion from cash point machines. This was a classic instance of one crime being financed by the proceeds from another. In this case, the Brinks-mat job, its legacy wasn't just murder and mayhem. It also encouraged criminals to seek out bigger and even more lucrative targets. And there was another even more outlandish reason behind the willingness of certain members of the Brinks-mat gang to back the hole-in-the-wall job with cash. They believed that this crime would be so big it would overshadow Brinks-mat to such an extent that the police would at last ease off of the current investigation. The gang's plan was to tap into the latest banking technology, which meant they needed to recruit corrupt communications engineers and computer experts in order to make huge numbers of cloned cash point cards. These would then be used to empty cash from the bank accounts of thousands of ordinary people. If they pulled it off, it could throw the entire British banking system into chaos. It emerged in the evidence given in court that computer boffin Martin Grant was recruited from inside Blantyre House open prison in Kent, where Kenneth Noy had been held during the last few months of his sentence. Grant had been jailed for attempting to murder his wife and child, so was as far away from being a professional criminal as you could get. In prison, he had studied for a degree in electrical communications. Grant was allowed out on day release for work experience at a van hire business owned by Paul Kidd, another villain involved in the cash card cloning scheme. In the late spring of 1995, a few months after the plan's inception, the hole-in-the-wall criminals and their Brinks-mat backers enjoyed a champagne dinner at a Kent hotel, followed by some late-night entertainment, in the company of a group of prostitutes who had been hired for the entire night. Amongst those villains was nervy computer wizard Martin Grant. Unbeknownst to the gang, Grant, who was plainly out of his depth amongst the hard men of South London, was already feeding information about the cash card scam to the police. He confessed to a prison chaplain about the planned robbery and later made a statement of over 300 pages to Scotland Yard detectives. On that evening, when the men were supposed to have sex with the prostitutes, Grant got cold feet. He didn't want to sleep with any hookers, not even the ones specially recruited in London's West End by the Brinks-mat criminals. Noy became particularly infuriated with Grant when he turned down one of the girls. Tensions had been building between the two men for weeks, and Noy had only agreed to keep Grant on the team because of his computer knowledge. It was invaluable. Eventually, Grant forced himself to go through the motions and sleep with one girl to indicate he was still on their team and avoid giving himself away as a grass. It was a disaster, and the other gang members made fun of him because of his failure to perform. They had none of Grant's scruples and swapped hookers amongst themselves, as well as taking mountains of cocaine. But Kenneth Noy remained furious with Grant, and he told the other villains he was very suspicious about his behaviour. Later, Grant provided fascinating insight into Little Legs Lloyd and his friend Kenneth Noy. Noy and Lloyd were just names to me at first. They meant nothing, but people inside prison talked about them as if they were gods. Grant said he attended one meeting with the gang where Noy and Legs produced prison paperwork on his record and family background, which clearly had been given to Legs by prison staff. Those details included addresses of Grant's mother and brother. Then, in a chilling incident, Little Legs drove Grant up to his mother's house in the Midlands, walked in through the door and introduced himself to Grant's mother. Just to let me know he knew where she lived, Grant explained. John Lloyd then phoned Kenny Noy to say he had met my mum. I was so scared. Grant added, Kenny Noy and Lloyd told stories about hijacking vehicles in the early days and what they did to people who crossed them. Grant said they also made continual references to other criminal associates in Spain and the United States. After they eventually arrested the hole-in-the-wall suspects, detectives were so worried that Noy and Lloyd might harm Grant that they put him in a safe house with armed officers 24 hours a day, only moving him by helicopter. Grant lives in fear of the two criminals to this day. I know they hold a grudge against me. I'm very nervous about it. Nevertheless, the information that Grant had provided allowed the police to swoop. At Blantree House Prison, where Kenneth Noy had once been an inmate, a warder and an inmate were arrested in July 1995. Hello, how you doing, Cranky? At least 6 other prisoners were moved from the prison following a number of nationwide raids by Scotland Yard's check and credit card squad. On the 25th of July 1995, the mansion in Yalding, Kent, South East London legend in his own lifetime, Billy Hayward, was raided by detectives investigating the same hole-in-the-wall scam. Officers seized more than 70,000 blank cash cards and 28 computer disks. They immediately arrested Hayward and 4 other suspected members of the firm. Now, detectives decided that they didn't have enough evidence to go after the Brinks-mat backers, including Ken Noy, even though they knew the names of the robbers and the gang members who'd invested the money in the scheme through their associate Hayward, because they were even named in an open court. Not surprisingly, a murder contract was eventually put on computer boffin Martin Grant. This was allegedly taken out by the rest of the gang, who rightly presumed he'd grasped them up. As Roy Ram, one of the senior detectives involved in the case, later explained, the ATM scam was a classic example of a group of South London robbers and villains who saw an opportunity to get a great deal of money, but did not have the technical expertise, so they worked outside their circle and brought in somebody who would eventually destroy them. Now, over in Spain's Costa del Crime, an artful old face of the good old days, of the Crays and the Richardsons was circling the proceeds of the Brinks-mat robbery. Much to the concern of gang members like McAvoy and Robinson, Joe Wilkins was one of the dying breed of London villains who loved playing everyone off against each other. The cops, other mobsters, even poor old Joe Public, they all provided an income to dodgepot Joe Wilkins at one time or another. Joe Wilkins exuberantly performed the roles of sometime fraudster, Soho Vice King, and friend to many of London and Spain's most notorious British gangsters. Rumours are flown around that the Houdini-like Wilkinson was given a helping hand to flee prison in the early 1990s, specifically so that he could move to Spain and work as a major informant for the police and security services, who had long been obsessed with nicking many of the villains who were still living in luxury there. At 6 feet 3 inches tall, Joe Wilkins was a handsome, larger-than-life character who favoured Michael Caine-style horn-rimmed specs and was married for a long time to a glamorous dancer, Pearl Reed, who later modelled in her bra at the age of 56 as part of the Age Concern's 1998 advertising poster campaign. In Spain, Wilkins agreed to introduce coppers posing as businessmen to major villas operating there and in Gibraltar. They were lured into investing their dirty money into a laundering scheme that was really a police front. It turned into a 5-year operation that snared dozens of criminals washing money from vice drugs and tobacco smuggling rackets. However, that sting eventually led to years of legal wrangling and accusations of entrapment against the police. This ended in August 2003, when after 414 days, the main case was thrown out of Southwark Crown Court in London, with the judge denouncing the sting as massively illegal. But when Joe Wilkins was never one to do things by halves, the South Londoner with more front than Woolworths was even rumoured to have played a role in the 1989 Death on the Rock affair, in which 3 IRA members were gunned down by the SAS in cold blood while travelling through Gibraltar. In the late 1990s, Wilkins was introduced to one of the Brinks-mat gang who was on holiday in Marbella. Wilkins suggested that he knew a way in which the remaining Brinks-mat gold could be turned into hard cash without going through a smelting process. Joe Wilkins, he claimed that certain Colombian cocaine cartels were prepared to be paid in gold for shipments of drugs, which could, in every sense of the phrase, kill a lot of birds with one stone. The Brinks-mat gang members knew only too well that the police were still hot on their trail, and this seemed a practical and highly lucrative way of converting gold into pure cash, with the added incentive of huge profits and the actual shipments of cocaine. But no one realised at the time was that, in a similar move to his previous double crossing, Wilkins had been persuaded to make the approach by officers from Scotland Yard and America's DEA, who wanted to try and close down the Colombian cartels as well as track down the remainder of the Brinks-mat gold. Then the curse of the Brinks-mat struck once again with a vengeance. In 2004, Joe Wilkins died suddenly in Estepona at the age of 68, and to this day no one knows exactly why. His family have always refused to discuss his death, but one detective who dealt with Wilkins on the Costa del Sol admitted, "Joe pushed his luck. He was playing us all off against each other, and one day his time was up. None of us were surprised, but it was still very sad because Joe was a one-off, a likeable, almost lovable rogue who could light up the room with his charisma. But the stupid old sod thought he was invincible, and that cost him his life." No one who played these sorts of games was ever safe. Now, the 10th of November 1995 was a Friday night like any other in Raquel's nightclub in Basildon, Essex, when a youth called Stephen Smith bought 4 tablets of ecstasy. But later that night, one of those pills would kill a schoolgirl called Leah Betts, sparking a nationwide debate on the dangers of ecstasy, as well as other outrage against the evil drug dealers responsible. The consignment of ecstasy from which Leah's fatal pill came, bought through Kenneth Noy's friend and former Swaleside prison henchman, the 18-stone muscle man, Pat Tate, had undoubtedly been purchased with proceeds from the Brinks-mat heist. It could perhaps be argued that this was yet another example of the curse's deadly work. Nightclub boss Tony Tucker was Tate's right-hand man, along with another steroid freak called Craig Rolfe. Raquel's piano bar had been transformed into the neon-lit buzz bar on that particular night, complete with hypnotic dance music to help bring in the young crowd. Tate, by now nicknamed the Enforcer, and Tony Tucker themselves living life on the edge. They took constant rounds of drug cocktails of cocaine, ketamine, and ecstasy, which caused them to suffer violent mood swings. On one occasion, Tate got into an argument at a Basildon pizza restaurant over the topping he wanted. He punched the manager and then smashed his head down on a plate glass counter. Now, the manager was too scared to make a statement to the police, but none of this seemed to bother the Brinks-mat gang, who had happily bankrolled Tate and Trucker's drug deals. Now, the ecstasy tablets supplied by Tate and Tucker in the club that fateful night were called apples. 4 of them were obtained by Stephen Smith, who gave one to his friend Leah Betts for her birthday that night. The young man bought them in good faith without being told they were double strength. They cost Leah Betts her life. This was a little concern to the Brinks-mat gang. Their only priority was the profit that they were making. Conservative estimates put the value of the ecstasy business in Britain by the mid-1990s at more than £500 million per year. The ecstasy trade adhered to the classic economic rule: buy low, sell high. Most of the ecstasy flooding into Britain could be bought wholesale by the criminals for as little as £1 a tablet. A large proportion came from the Netherlands, where some of the Brinks-mat gang members still had close contacts through their earlier gold smelting activities. It was then sold on the street through people like Tucker and Tate for sometimes as much as £20 per tablet. So a huge markup. So when buying it on wholesale, if they're getting them all at £1 and then they're going for £20. So that's some money coming in. So the Brinks-mat gang knew that the sheer scale of the production of ecstasy meant there was a vast supply of network in existence, and it was a much easier way of making money than smelting down gold. From manufacture in Europe to use in Britain, the ecstasy trade chain was complex, with up to 50 pairs of hands often involved. The Brinks-mat gang cut down to just 5 or 6 and saw their profits leap. Nevertheless, they were still able to keep their distance from the actual deals, so the risk of being caught was substantially reduced. So I'm just going to quickly have a look. Hello, Paul. Yeah, Mickey Steele. Yeah. He was wrong. He was looked into that. So, yeah, he was wrongfully put away for their murders. The Barron brothers. Let's have a look. Tell us who wasn't there. Oh, right. Okay, yeah. That's right, yeah. Okay, most of the ecstasy came through ports like Dover in Kent and Harwich in Essex, as well as illegal landings on the quieter beaches of England's south coast. Freedom of movement under EU laws meant it was difficult for customs officers to track down the ecstasy traffickers, who were capable of smuggling thousands of tablets in something as small as a briefcase. From the English ports, the ecstasy was quickly moved to warehouses in London that the Brinks-mat backers had rented specifically for its distribution. It was then taken to a wholesale suppliers in the main urban centres of Essex, Kent and East Anglia, as well as the more familiar territory of South East London. Enforcer Pat Tate was in charge of ensuring that tens of thousands of tablets every weekend got into the hands of small-time dealers who were essential to the entire process. Not everyone in the criminal underworld approved of the switch from robbing banks and security vans to dealing drugs. Former Craig's henchman Freddie Foreman explained years later, drugs were becoming like heavy gangsterism. There were too many people involved. It became widespread. There was also a stigma in dealing drugs. Some people would name so-called drug dealers to police just to get them off the streets. All the people I know and associate with from the old school, they don't want to know nothing about drugs at all. But the Brinks-mat gang didn't care about what the other criminals thought. However, there were other types of problems brewing for the Brinks-mat gang. The so-called King of Catford, Tony White, who had escaped criminal prosecution, even though he'd been long suspected of being one of the Brinks-mat robbers, was furious with Kenneth Noy for settling insurance claims on the missing gold bullion because it sparked civil proceedings against White by insurance agents. White found it particularly irritating because he'd been tempted to do the same thing himself. At a High Court civil hearing, Judge Mr. Justice Rimmer stated that White did at least participate in the planning of the robbery and added, Mr. White is a dishonest man with an appalling criminal record. How you doing, Chris Trott? Good to see you. Okay, just want to take a breather there. Okay, Chris, if you type. Okay. Now, the judge also pointed out that White's earlier acquittal at the Old Bailey in 1984 only meant the jury were not satisfied. White was guilty according to the standard proof required. White and his wife Margaret were ordered by the High Court to repay £2,188,600 and also £1,084,344 respectively in compensation to the insurers of the gold. Now, it represented the value of the amount of gold that White was alleged to have been given from the original robbery. White furiously blamed Noy for opening up the floodgates by paying up so easy, and the split in the ranks of the Brinks-mat gang began to widen by the day. As time went by, even more new camps started to emerge. The actual robbers still saw themselves as a much higher plane than the backers, like Noy and the other associates who had only been responsible for turning gold into hard cash. McAvoy and Robinson kept themselves particularly aloof. They believed that by serving their sentences, they had the right to expect every penny of their share to be waiting for them when they finally got released. Anything less than that, and as one of South East London criminal lawyer explained, there would be hell to pay. Now, there was feeling amongst the actual robbers that people such as Noy, Reader and Perry were taking the piss, because after serving such shorter sentences, they were now once more out and about, benefiting from the proceeds of the raid, the publicity that Noy had garnered since the stabbing of undercover cop John Fordham in his garden also greatly irritated the actual Brinks-mat robbers. They blamed Noy for sparking the police's near obsession with bringing them all to justice, believing that the killing of the copper had galvanised the police at a time when the Kent and Met forces were not exactly getting on like a house on fire. Meanwhile, Brinks-mat insurers continued to press for the recovery of the rest of the gold from the robbery. The investigators continued to travel as far as Scotland, the Ireland, Denmark and Germany, Spain, Cyprus, Greece, Hong Kong and the Far East. Were they ratting? No, nothing's ever confirmed that they were ratting, so there was no proof, but who knows? Investigators also traced a huge sum of money in one bank account in the Middle East after months of constant surveillance, yet the Brinks-mat gang could still flex their muscles if they felt the need. One nosy insurance agent who'd been watching a gang member while he was abroad had heroin planted on him in an attempt to get him arrested when he arrived later back in Britain. The Brinks gang remained as obsessed as ever with turning the gold into much vaster wealth. And naturally, they continued to cultivate links with policemen and politicians in order to make sure they got advance notice of any potential problems. In many ways, the Brinks-mat gang had become its own secret club. In an effort to hold the gang together, they'd even held parties to make sure everyone involved was still on board. In other words, join in or get out seemed to be the overriding message. Gang members regularly paid for 2 women to host parties in a rented house in Bexley Heath, on the edge of the southeast London suburbs, where so many of the gang hailed from. They always invited other important people who could be of great use to them. Everyone from bank managers to police officers to solicitors was asked. These gatherings were held almost Fridays through the second half of 1995 and the first few months of 1996. The hookers were encouraged to sleep with the guests so that robbers would have even more favours to call on if anyone posed a threat to their many illicit operations. Kent police allegedly knew all about the parties, but there was little they could do about them since no actual laws were being broken. But across the Dartford Tunnel in the Badlands of Essex, a deadly feud sparked by the Brinks-mat gold was about to come to a bloody conclusion. On an icy cold December day in 1995, an anonymous Range Rover was parked in front of a set padlock gates that led into a fishing lake close to a 130-acre White House farm near Rettendon, Essex. How you doing, Krumel? The 2 men who rented out the lake, Ken Jiggins and Peter Theobald, drove towards the car on a lonely farm track blanketed with snow. At first, they didn't even notice that one of the rear windows of the Range Rover was shattered. The Range Rover was blocking their route, so they climbed out of their Land Rover and tapped on the car's window to ask if the occupants could move. But there was no response. So the 2 men, they looked inside, looked further, peacefully, that Ken Jiggins thought that they were asleep. Then Jiggins spotted that the driver was slumped on one side, with blood running from his nose and mouth. His eyes were closed. The passenger was sitting bolt upright, with blood all over his face and chest. Jiggins stepped back from the car window with a jolt, hand shaking, and he called the police on his mobile phone. Next, Theobald realised that there was a 3rd dead body slumped in the back seat. It was Kenneth Noye's old prison friend, gym fanatic Pat Tate, who had been blasted twice in the head and once in the chest. Neither of the men could see any footprints leading away from the vehicle in the snow. Within less than an hour, the place was crawling with police as the Range Rover, registration number F424 NPE, was covered with a tarpaulin and loaded onto a police lorry with the bodies of Pat Tate and his criminal associates, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, still inside. Forensic experts spent the rest of the day combining the track and the surrounding area for any clues. They were combing it, Overhead, a helicopter scanned the fields with a heat-seeking camera for any more evidence of what happened. Police believe Rolfe, Tate and Tucker had been lured to their deaths by the promise of a massive drug deal. It wasn't until detectives started searching more widely that they uncovered the Ecstasy connection between the Brinks-mat gang and Pat Tate. Police discovered that Tate, Tucker and Rolfe had been invited to meet in order to inspect a landing site for a light plane just close to where they died. The aircraft was due to bring in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of ecstasy. Their host was another associate of the Brinks-mat gang, Michael Steele, 55. Steele had met the other three men at a pub and climbed in the back of their Range Rover alongside Tate, who was so relaxed about the meet that he didn't even bother bringing along a gun. But as the car turned into a quiet lane off the A130, it had stopped at a close gate where Steele's accomplice, Jack Holmes, was hiding. Now, I know that, Grant, we mentioned this in there. I'm going this off the book. This book is probably, I think it's 2015. So obviously, as we know that there's certain bits of evidence have come out since then. Steele opened the back door of the Range Rover to get out and open the gate as Holmes rose from the ground and ran towards the car, blasting away with a shotgun. Only Tate had time to put up his hands and hunch down. Tucker and Rolfe were killed instantly. After Holmes reloaded, Steele is believed to have taken the gun from him and shot each of the men behind their ears just to make sure. Interviews with the police and criminals have uncovered that Tate wasn't averse to a horse trading with police if he thought it would be to his advantage. As one Essex drug dealer later explained, Pat Tate thought he was a clever bastard. There were rumours that he'd been feeding old Bill with info to keep them off his back. Was the Brinks-mat gang's involvement in the ecstasy trade one of the tidbits Tate offered to the police? If it was, then I'd say it was certain he'd signed his own death warrant, added the Essex drug insider. Whatever the truth, it didn't stop more business opportunities continuing to come the way of the Brinks-mat gang. Many more lowly criminals were seeking them out for financial backing in much of the same way movie producers seek money to finance new films. Kenneth Noy, at least two other members of the gang, got involved in a plan to import a brand new designer drug into Britain. They spent months in a high-level negotiations to buy vast quantities of the hallucinogenic cat, which is an African drug, and it was from African drug barons. Although legal in its raw form, cat leaves were processed by some dealers into capsules of oil, which did breach British drug laws. Now, the Brinks-mat gang were persuaded by a number of criminal associates that it would be possible to make even bigger profits out of cat from ecstasy. If the market was saturated immediately, they were seriously considering investing as much as £500,000 in the drug over the following 8 months. But then they were concerned that no one had tried a similar operation before. The Brinks-mat gang eventually decided to sit and wait to see if cat had the impact on the British drug scene that everyone kept telling them it would be before they risked too much cash. In the end, it never properly materialised on the open market. The gang's business instincts had saved them from losing a lot of money. But the police were still pressing hard by constantly watching Brinks-mat gang members such as Noy and Brian Reeder. This meant that they were starting to find it harder to run their criminal enterprises. The police were constantly turning up at their homes, demanding answers to questions about crimes in which they might or might not have been involved in. Though Noy and Reeder kept their cool, their patience was wearing thin, and some of the gang members were beginning to really thinking about moving abroad. Okay. Right. What should we do? Okay. Right. The Brinks-mat. Now, in this next section I'm going to speak about is the M25 M20 intersection. This was in Swanley in Kent. Okay, and it was at 1:15 in the afternoon on the 19th of May 1996. Brinks-mat gold bullion handler Kenneth Noy had a lot on his mind. Loads of things to do and lots of people to see when a small red Bedford Rascal van swerved in front of him as he headed at speed down the motorway slip road. He angrily flashed the full beams of his Land Rover Discovery at the van and blasted his horn as the vehicle slowed down for the first set of traffic lights on the busy intersection near Swanley in Kent, right in the heart of what police often referred to as shotgun territory. As the lights turned green, Noy was shaking with rage. He swung his L-registered Discovery across the two-lane roundabout to pursue the van. He was infuriated and even decided to teach the driver a lesson. Electrician Stephen Cameron, 21, and his pretty blonde fiancée, Danielle Cable, 19, had set off in their Bedford minivan minutes earlier from the nearby homes to get some bagels for a late Sunday breakfast. Danielle had no idea that her driving had just sparked a tirade of abuse from a motorist in a Land Rover Discovery. Just then, Noy cut them up again and Danielle was forced to brake hard to avoid a collision. "That was stupid," said Stephen Cameron, who was sitting next to his fiancée in the van. He looked across the driver of the Discovery and shook his head. The two vehicles moved on to the next set of traffic lights, just a couple of 100 feet along the busy roundabout. This time the Land Rover pulled up sharply in front of them. Noy got out. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and a short jacket with a zip. Witnesses later said he seemed to be looking for something in his pocket of his jacket. Cameron, well over 6 foot in height, stepped out of the van as Noy, now 50, approached. Cameron towered over the older man as they came face to face. Noy and Cameron exchanged a few words before Noy punched Cameron hard in the face. As he recovered his balance, Cameron noticed something glinting in the other man's hand. He immediately tried to kick whatever it was out of his grasp. "Hello, Heidi." "Get in the van! Get in the van!" Danielle Cable shouted at her fiancé. As the two men struggled together, Noy twice plunged a knife into Cameron's heart and liver. In the middle of all of this, Danielle Cable frantically tried to stop someone from the stream of the passing traffic. "Help! Please help us!" she screamed. Cameron, despite his injuries, was still trying to kick the knife out of Noy's hand. That's when Daniela saw the 4-inch blade glinting in the sunlight. Not one of many passing motorists even attempted to stop and help. Danielle ran to Cameron as he began staggering towards her, clutching his chest. It was only then she noticed the blood all over him. Cameron told her, "He stabbed me, Dan. Get his number plate." Danielle looked across the driver of the Land Rover. Kenneth Noy was walking back to his car, still carrying the knife in his hand. Another motorist later said he saw Noy smiling. "Help! Somebody please help us!" screamed Danielle Cable as she once more looked at her fiancé, covered in his own blood. He collapsed in her arms. Nearby, the Discovery's tyres screeched as Noy drove off at high speed. Minutes later, an ambulance arrived, but it was already too late. Cameron never recovered consciousness and was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital at 2:10 p.m. Kenneth Noy had a bloody nose and swollen eyes. He shot back onto the M25, swerving to avoid at least two other motorists. He needed time to think about what to do. After driving around for more than half an hour, he realised he had to break cover and use his mobile phone. He immediately made a flurry of frantic calls in an effort to rally his associates who could help hatch an escape plan. He knew there was no point in waiting around for the police to come calling. Noy spoke to the family and friends a total of 17 times in the 9 hours following the killing of Stephen Cameron that tragic Sunday lunchtime. At 2:04 p.m, Noy rang wife Brenda back at their house in Sevenoaks, just 49 minutes after the fatal stabbing. The call lasted just 8 seconds after Noy decided it was too risky to speak in any detail on the phone. Over the next hours, a series of short, increasingly frantic calls were exchanged by Noy and his friends, family and contacts. At 10:42 p.m, he spoke to the pilot of the helicopter he intended to used to escape the country. After that, Noy's mobile went silent for the following 2 days until his son Kevin made a brief call to it. It was never used again. Within 24 hours of Noy's attack on Cameron, he flew into a close business associate's private helicopter from a field in Bristol to a golf course in Cannes, in Normandy, in France. From there, he took a private jet laid on by John Palmer to Madrid in Spain. Noy knew at that moment the police worked out he was responsible for the road rage death of Stephen Cameron. He'd become the most wanted man in Britain, having been public enemy #1 in the aftermath of John Fordham's killing. This was something he was used to, but until they made the connection between the two deaths, Noyd had to use every available moment to ensure that he put as many miles as possible between himself and his peace pursuers. Just as Noyd's helicopter rose above the countryside outside Bristol, his Land Rover Discovery, which later still contained the knife he'd used to kill Stephen Cameron, was being driven in a bizarre 3-car convoy to Dartford, Kent. The last car had a very distinctive number plate and was owned by one of Noy's closest friends. The middle vehicle, Noy's Land Rover Discovery, turned into a scrap yard and minutes later was crushed into a compressed box of jagged steel. Kenneth Noy's cronies were already playing a significant part in helping the notorious criminal to cover his tracks. Now, the murder of the hard-working electrical engineer Stephen Cameron shocked the nation. Headlines the following day included "Police hunt for road rage killer" and "Horror of motor road rage murder." Across the country, there was stunned disbelief that the motorist could take a life of another just because of a row over their driving. Within the Brinks-mat gang, word of Noy's involvement was already spreading, and they experienced outrage of a different kind. Many of them believed that Noy's reckless act had once again focused even more attention on their own activities. As one gang member later told me, Noy was at it all over again. He was a fucking liability. The only clue to the identity of the Land Rover Discovery driver at this stage was a description given by heartbroken fiancée Daniela Cable. She told police that he was about 5'10", slim, with a brown collar-length hair. He was also clean-shaven, wearing jeans and a dark bomber jacket. Other witnesses who had been crossing the section of the motorway, which ran over the scene of the murder, provided police with the opening part of the Discovery's registration number, and officers were hoping that the video cameras by the motorway might yield some clues. However, the footage was no help in identifying the killer. Next, the police announced that they were planning to check 1,000 drivers of L-registered Land Rover Discovery vehicles. With an image of the murder was published in the newspapers, it prompted various names to be put forward by members of the public as possible suspects. But it didn't provide any firm leads. Police were being very careful not to reveal the identity of Cameron's fiancée, Daniela Cable, as she was the only real witness to the entire incident. There were genuine fears that the killer might come after her if they knew where to find her. Not surprisingly, Cameron's family and friends were having a great difficulty coming to terms with what had happened. At an emotional press conference given 3 days after the killing, Cameron's brother Michael said, "He was the kindest and most affectionate person. We are absolutely crushed, and I don't have the words to express it. The family is so close, and there is so much love generated that we're going to get through this." It was not until they started studying the computer image of the road rage killer more closely that detectives on the case also began to make a possible connection to Kenneth Noy. "Hello there, Coltrane. Good to see you." Not only was there an uncanny likeness, but Noy's house was reasonably close to the scene of the murder. The team set about making discreet inquiries and established that Noy had been regularly seen driving a Land Rover Discovery. Perhaps significantly, they discovered Noy had left the country the day after the road rage killing. The connection was becoming more credible. More than a week after the killing of Stephen Cameron, police raided Kenneth Noy's Sevenoaks home, looking for evidence that might link him to the crime. They took away papers, clothes, and the Range Rover, as well as closely quizzing Brenda. What they didn't realise was that Noy was actually being shadowed at the time of the killing by undercover detectives investigating the Brinks-mat criminal activities. However, they had not followed him on that day of the murder of Stephen Cameron. The surveillance team monitored his departure from Britain the day after the murder without realising the significance of his flight abroad. As one detective later admitted, it was just one of those things. No one realised he was someone who was wanted for questioning about a road rage killing because the police had not identified him by that early stage. Behind the scenes, detectives tried everything to find Kenneth Noy before the news of his link to the killing became public. This was not revealed to the other police forces immediately because the detectives feared that Noy might find out that he had become a suspect. Noy was lucky. His continued relationship with some policemen had left many officers deeply untrusting of their colleagues, and that helped him slip through the net, explained one Kent detective. On the 9th of June 1996, Kenneth Noy was publicly named as suspect in the road rage death of Stephen Cameron in a huge front page splash story in the News of the World. It was a blow for the police who'd hoped they could have keep his alleged involvement under wraps until they had located him. There it was in the headlines. Cop killer Noy to be quizzed over road rage murder, screamed the headline in Britain's most popular Sunday tabloid. Just days before the road rage killing, Kenneth Noy had met with a car dealer he knew called John Marshall, who supplied him with the stolen vehicle license plates, including those used on the Land Rover Discovery linked to the death of Stephen Cameron. Following the murder, tattooed Marshall, 34, vanished into thin air after leaving his £250,000 home in Little Bursted, Essex, to meet business contacts. The next day, he was found shot in the head and chest in the black Range Rover in Sydenham, South London. Marshall had also been a close friend of executed Pat Tate and his brother Russell. It emerged that Marshall had actually worked as a courier for some of the Brinks-mat financed Ecstasy runs to and from Holland. But the identity of the murderers remains a mystery to this day. South London villains and many other police officers were starting to wonder if the killings would ever stop. The aftermath of the Brinks robbery had sparked a huge wave of violence and retribution. Now, on the 11th of January 1996, Kent police asked Interpol to issue a worldwide alert on Kenneth Noy, stating that he was wanted urgently for the questioning in relation to the murder on the M25 of Stephen Cameron. Every one of the 176 countries who were members of Interpol was sent a blue warrant and requested to alert Kent Police incident room at Dartford if Noy was ever seen. Detectives then announced that another character called Anthony Francis was wanted for questioning in connection with the road rage attack. In reality, the name was simply a pseudonym regularly used by Kenneth Noy and a number of his other Brinks-mat associates. Anthony Francis was the registered owner of the Land Rover Discovery L794 JTF, which was traced to the house in Brigden Road, Bexley Heath, where Kenneth Noy had paid for those hostesses parties earlier in the year during the part of 1995. Both the women who rented the house in Bexley Heath moved out shortly after the road rage attack. Police eventually interviewed both of them. They also dug up a part of the back garden just in case any of the missing Brinks-mat bullion was anywhere to be found. Nothing was located. Kent police were informed by Scotland Yard surveillance team shadowing Noy that he had travelled to northern Cyprus in late May, where he had slipped into familiar surroundings of the port of Kyrenia. Turkish Cypriot police had a record of Noy arriving by ship. but he vanished before the police could link him to the road rage attack. No one knew where he was now. Worse still, there was no extradition treaty between Northern Cyprus and the UK, which was disastrous news for the road rage police investigation team. Now, even if Noy was caught, it wouldn't be easy getting him back to stand trial. While he was in Northern Cyprus, Noy visited his recently purchased timeshare development, which was still under construction by local builders. The development should have been the perfect refuge, except that too many people knew of his connection with it. Development manager Colin Reeder, brother of Brinks-mat co-defendant Brian, was less than helpful when his author approached him on the island a few months after the killing. "Fuck off," were the only words he'd utter in response to questions about Noy. It was made very clear that it would be advisable to leave the development immediately or face physical intimidation. In Swanley, Kent, the family and friends of Stephen Cameron attended his funeral service. It was a measure of the sense of shock within the community and across the country that so many people turned up for it. Crowds stood outside the church listening on loudspeakers. After the service at St. Mary, the Virgin Church, Detective Superintendent Nick Biddis, the detective leading the hunt for the Cameron's killer, said he believed that the associates of the criminal community could have information about the killer and his vehicle. Inevitably, the trail would lead Biddis to the doorstep of yet more Brinks-mat gang members as part of that process. At 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday the 13th of June, 1996, 30 armed French police officers, tipped off by Kent police, swooped on a private plane as it landed in Le Bourget airport outside Paris. 4 squad cars swept across the runway as gendarmes surrounded the Learjet 55, who had stopped at Paris for refueling en route to Tenerife. The previous day, the Learjet registration number M104BS had flown from Bristol to St. Petersburg. The plane had some of its baggage were searched, and 5 men were held in question and then allowed to leave 2 hours later. In the months since the road rage killing of Stephen Cameron, the same jet had made a series of flights, some of which detectives believed involved Kenneth Noy. Now, on the 28th of June 1996, Noy allegedly flew back to Britain and launched at the China Gardens restaurant in West Kingsdown. Lunched at the China Garden restaurants in West Kingsdown with some other members of the Brinks-mat gang. It was if they were taunting the police, who the villains believed had set up Noy because they were still bitter about how he'd been acquitted for the murder of John Fordham. Hello, Claudio. Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Now, the police were even more reliant on their intelligence networks as they sought to track Noy and other Brinks-mat gang members, who were now creating all sorts of smokescreens to confuse their pursuers. Occasionally, scraps of genuine information came to the police from their underworld contacts, many of whom had been preferred to see Noy no longer at liberty since the stir he caused was alerting the police of their own illicit activities. Rumours were also circulating that Stephen Cameron knew his killer. This was completely untrue, but the lack of hard facts in the case had the case knock-on effect of encouraging wild rumours to spread. Equally, in a case that might eventually hang on the question of the identity, Noy could argue that the public juxtaposition to his face with the identity kit image compiled with Danielle Cable's helped damage his chances of a fair hearing. At the end of June, Kent detectives revealed that they wanted to speak to a close friend of Noy's called Jerry Copeland. Copeland drove a dark blue Mitsubishi Shogun, similar in appearance to the Land Rover Discovery. Identified by Cameron's fiancée, Daniela, as the vehicle used by the killer. At this stage, police still had not established that the killer had definitely driven a Discovery, despite being certain of Noy's link to the killing. There were a number of Noy sightings in southeast England at the time, suggesting that he was either taunting the police by popping in and out of Britain as he pleased, despite being a wanted man, or he was spreading rumours of his presence just to test out the response time of the police and waste their resources. Underworld resources suggested to the police that Noy was renting a villa in Portugal near Lisbon. They also insisted that he was continually flying in and out of Elstree Airfield, just north of London. It was even claimed that he'd pop into a house in Essex for a relative's birthday celebrations. Over in Sevenoaks, Kent, Noy's wife Brenda was still fielding virtually non-stop inquiries from the journalists. She'd never forgiven the media for the way they treated her and her husband following the killing of John Fordham. In an interview with this author in July 1996, she claimed that her husband was being persecuted over the road rage killing. Brenda Noy said, "Don't talk to me about him wanting to come back to help the police. He'd be an idiot to come back. What they would do is stick him in a Category A prison for 2 years, pick the jury, get the guilty verdict they want. I have no idea where he is and I don't want to know. As far as I'm concerned, he is better off out." Ironing clothes in the kitchen of the house in Sevenoaks, she added, "I live in fear of my life. I moved here after the Brinks-mat case because I feared for the safety of my family. Now I'm living in fear again because of all this publicity. Nobody had ever heard of my husband before the bloody Brinks-mat case." She also said, in reference to the death of John Fordham, "Okay, he was a gold smuggler, but he was put in prison where he had to defend himself." By September 1996, the Kent's police frustration was mounting because Kenneth Noy really did seem to have disappeared into thin air. All the surveillance reports, alleged sightings and underworld rumours had come to nothing. Now, the Daily Mirror put up a £10,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of the road rage killer. Kent detectives issued an internal wanted poster in the Police Gazette in the same week as the Mirror award. It included 2 photographs of Noy and warned that he was violent and that he carries knives. The special notice was sent to police forces throughout Britain. On the 26th of September 1996, the Brinks-mat curse claimed yet another victim. Kent businessman Keith Hadley was woken on his 45-foot motor yacht, Carayan in Corfu, by the sound of men apparently trying to steal his dinghy. According to friends who were guests on board, Headley ran through the boat to collect a shotgun, which he always kept loaded, and fired 2 shots into the sky to scare the thieves. Now, the raiders returned fire with 3 shots, 2 of which Headley in the shoulder and stomach, fatally wounding him. Police blamed the attack on a group of Albanian pirates. Initially, the incident was brushed off as a tragic example of international piracy. But back in the South London underworld, there were rumours that Headley had crossed the Brinks-mat gang after some of the gold he was supposed to be looking after, had gone missing. Headley had been on his yacht with a woman called Valerie Pallet, who was unknown to his family, including wife Sylvia back in the UK. All 3 of the 57-year-old Headley's guests. The others were an old school friend called Patrick Hills and wife Jane. They were interviewed after the attack. Headley, a father of 2 who lived in Borough Green, Kent, and ran 3 building firms, had been on the island for 6 days. Headley's brother David, 60 from Folkestone, later said Keith visited the island 2 or 3 times a year, often with sons Gary, who was 29, and Ian, who was 25. Of Miss Pallet, his brother said, I've never heard of her. Headley's sprawling farmhouse was located very near to the Noy family home in Sevenoaks and had even been searched by the police during the Brinks-mat inquiry. Headley was never charged, despite the discovery of a shorn-off shotgun at his property, but the police raid had sparked suspicion in the underworld that he might have fed information to the detectives in exchange for having any potential charges against him dropped. Though they had been close friends during the years when they lived near each other, Keith Headley and Kenneth Noy had fallen out over some money that Noy reckoned he was owed. Whatever the truth of the matter, Headley's death was clearly another example of just how dangerous it was to be associated with the Brinks-mat robbery. In November 1996, 7 men accused of taking part in the Brinks-mat inspired hole-in-the-wall cash dispenser scam were found guilty. John Littlelegs Lloyd, still rumoured to be one of the original Brinks-mat robbers, was described by the judge as one of the main organisers of this crime. The hole-in-the-wall defendants also included Paul Kidd, who was 36, Graham Moore, 32, Stephen Seton, 65, and Stephen Moore, 41. The legendary local villain, Billy Hayward, and John Maguire, 36. All but one was from Kent or South East London. They entered guilty pleas after failing an attempt to have the proceedings stayed as an abuse of process. Kenneth Noy was named in the court as playing a part in the organisation of the crime, but there had never been enough evidence for the police to press for a prosecution. Now, the Brinks-mat connections was there for everyone to see. After Littlelegs Lloyd copped a 5-year stretch for his part in the hole-in-the-wall scam, this author paid his live-in love, Jean Savage, a visit at their immaculate bungalow in West Kingsdown in Kent, which they'd bought from Noy more than 12 years earlier. Jean proved a charming lady, despite her 2 Rottweilers and her 7-foot-high brick wall, complete with electronically controlled gates that surrounded the property. Following a 10-minute chat on her intercom, Savage made it clear she wasn't going to talk any further about Lloyd and his criminal activities. In 1999, Lloyd was released from prison and nothing has been heard from him since. But he's around and he's looking for new business opportunities, or so I've heard, one old South East London face said at the time. Okay, so we've covered the hole-in-the-wall scam. We've also covered as well the investment into Ecstasy. We've covered a couple of murders that have happened there. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to park it there. We're getting near to the end now. I just want to go through the chat because I've been glancing and just want to say hello to Claudio John Perry. Good to see you. Yeah. Grant, nice to see you in here for the first time. I've seen you in the others. Thank you. I appreciate it. Paul, excellent. Okay, Krumel. Now, does anyone have any questions at all? Please feel free. Anything you want me to go over or touch on, Gerard? And you too, Co-Train. Thank you for coming. Thanks, Paul. Any questions anyone want me to touch on? So look, what happened to the gold? Well, Gerard, to be honest, it hasn't been recovered. I think they've recovered some of it. A lot of it obviously got smelted down and got resold on the market. And then as the businesses, a lot of ventures, drugs, property investment, a lot of it got washed up and invested in that way. But if you have heard of the Hatton Garden heist, there's a couple of characters that got jailed in that were part of this. And they believe that some of the gold was still out there. Thank you. Yeah, so that's the book itself is by Wensley Clarkson that we've been following, and it's called The Curse of the Brinks-mat, the Brinks Mafia. Same time tomorrow? Yeah, I think so. Paul, I think we're nearly there. I think we'll wrap it up tomorrow. I could get that one out. Yeah, if we get at 9 o'clock. No problem at all. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. But I'll ask some questions, and I know we've got most of you. We can answer questions in the chat. But if there's anyone that would like to come up, and we'll have a chat as well, I don't mind. It's completely down to yourselves. Yeah, no worries, Crewmel. As I say, it's a lot of information. I'm glad that you guys come in and stay to the end. This is the sort of live that you probably have to come back and pause and revisit. And obviously, as well, because of the information that I'm putting in there, you want to be able to stop, process it, and sort of use your imagination of what's going on. So I appreciate that. No problem at all. Thank you. Just want to say hello to, because I know the chat was going. Sorry, my head was down. I was trying to get the information out. So I just want to go back and through the chat, just so I didn't mess anyone. Because as I say, it's always proper when people come in. You always like to acknowledge everyone. Yeah. Thank you, Miss Heidi Black. It's been a pleasure. As I say, I'm gonna with the next one. It's going to be a lot smaller, but I'm gonna come away and talk about bits, and I'll stop in between parts and I'll take questions on a particular section. It's just because, as I say now, this is probably like the 7th or 8th episode. Okay. Thank you, Miss Cranky. Thank you for coming. Joe, thank you. Let's go through. Yeah, and Chris Chock. I'm glad we managed to pull him away from the poker table. He's enjoying the poker. Good man. That's right. The Leah Betts, that was a big thing. And that's right. I remember explaining about what it was is because I think what she died of drinking too much water. She effectively drowned herself. That's what the reactions to the ecstasy did. Yeah, Joe Wilkins. In a place called Gibraltar, well known as the Rock, 3 IRA scumbags were counting their stock. Yeah, I did see that. I heard a lot of rumours that they weren't. What happened to them? They weren't armed. But yeah, I'll leave that one out because I could spark a debate on that one. I don't really want to. Okay. I have met many Pat Tates in life. It's a few things. Roids, drugs, upbringing. Well, I can tell you that I have met Brian Robinson, who was him and Mick McAvoy were put away for 25 years. I met Brian back in 2005. I was only through a family member. And as I say, he had a social club in Lee at the time. And I'll tell you now, he was a gentleman. That's all I could say. I was there and I had a few drinks with him. And as I say, rest in peace. He passed away during COVID. Earlier this year as well, Mick McAvoy passed away as well. Rest in peace. There's quite a few. Brian Reader as well, who went away. Yeah, I remember. And I said when he had that club in Lee, and if anyone who does know him, or they knew him at the time, because he'd been out after a few years, and there was one thing he didn't like. He was drinking bottles of Bud. He didn't like his beer cold because the cold it messes with your guts, and that was one thing I noticed. He said he didn't. He liked his beer to be quite warm. But yeah, he was a gentleman. He was a nice fella. That's what. No worries. No worries. I know you've all got to bounce. I'm thankful that you all come. So I appreciate that. I really do. Of this time is still alive. Yeah. Ken Noyes still alive. It's believed he's living down in Cornwall with his wife. A lot of the other characters as well. that weren't involved, but they helped sort of move the gold around. Some of them are still alive as well. I won't name the names. Did I miss Mike F? Oh, Mike. 8.5 hour, 16-hour drive. No problem at all, Mike. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate that. No problem at all, Spirit. Always a pleasure. Right. Warm beer means you don't need to drink as much. Yeah, I wouldn't. Not warm beer. I'll be honest with you. If it's too warm, it make me feel sick. If I'm honest. Yeah, but each is to their own. It's quite unique because I don't think I've never known anyone to say that. Okay. Celtic Rangers, bro. And yeah, good people in the chat. 3 or 4 years. I'm not going to answer that. I'll tell you what I'll say. Partick Thistle. Okay. Is that Carol? Hello, Carol. No, you're all right. You're all right. Just caught at the end of just thanking everyone. Carol, you on later? You on later? If I drop that in there. Oh, not tonight. I've just put the link in there. If anyone wants to jump up and say a few words, I'm not keeping this open much longer. But if you wanted just to pop up, I don't mind. Can do. Carol, do you fancy popping up? Okay. Good. Yes, right, Krugel, yeah. They are from Glasgow, but everyone always says Celtic and Rangers. So if you don't want to get into a debate, that's the cool answer. Partick Thistle. Okay. So no one's popping up then. Right. Then what else? Right. Okay, guys. Well, I'll let you crack on. Yeah, no, absolutely, Carol. No worries at all. I was just chancing it. I just threw it down there. Plus, also as well, like you, I'm new to this. I like trying to just want to use all the functions like a kid. Oh, don't. Okay, right. In that case, then, folks, thank you for coming. I believe you've got 9 p.m. Please make sure you get over to ALV's. I think it's 8 or 9 p.m. Please check his page, support him. He's doing really well. So I encourage you all of you that have got channels. We just tap each other up and just come over when we can. So on that note, I'll let you all go. Have a great weekend. Have a great weekend, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. God bless.